conditions on this for you to go back to the pot and get another PPP loan. Some things are the same, so it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. They lowered the requirements on as far as the number of employees, so 300 employees or less, that's down from 500. And your revenue must have decreased at some quarter in 2020 compared to the same quarter 2019. And you must have spent all the money you received, which I don't think is a problem, but if you did receive a PPP loan, you must have spent those funds. You don't have to file for forgiveness on it, you just have to have spent it.
Romeo, does it have to have decreased by a certain percentage, like 25%, or it just has to have decreased?
Yeah, 25% or more decrease in any one quarter.
Okay.
And as long as you hit that for one quarter, you can apply. SBA was given 10 days from the time this was signed into law. So we're at 9 days now. So we foresee tomorrow the SBA will come out with the application. They'll have to push it out to the banks. So this should open fairly soon. And just like the original, the money is just there until it runs out. So if this is you, apply. They upped the dollar amount, but I think this may only apply to Jeannie if she's still on. If you're in a hard hit industry, which they consider accommodations and food service, it's anything under the industry classification 72. If you're in there, you're allowed to get 3.5 times. And I believe that applies retroactives even to your first loan, that you're able to go back and get more money and not have to get a second loan. So,
good.
All right, this piece is huge. I was surprised to see it in there, and it may not be getting as much press as I would have expected.
Okay.
Last year, the CARES Act, when it came out, said you can either do PPP or the employee retention credit. And of course, everyone went for the PPP. It's 2.5 times payroll. You get it forgiven. But this is huge.
Thanks. Bye.
They made it, first off, retroactive, that you can get this retention credit, which is basically $5,000 per employee. You must have paid that employee at least $10,000 in 2020. And either your business was closed, so the government said you can't open your business, so a non-essential industry, or your revenue must have been down by at least 50% in any quarter in 2020 compared to 2019. So if you meet that requirement, you can get a $5,000 per employee credit. They also extended it through the second quarter of 2021, and they made it even better. They said, all right, now your revenue for this year, for 2021, only has to be down 20%. And you get a tax credit of 70% of the wages per quarter, up to $7,000 per quarter, so $14,000. So
take it off and up.
Yeah, so this is up to $19,000 credit.
Will do. Thank you.
You've had some loss in revenue that you can go retroactive for. This is another huge piece. Back when the CARES Act said PPP loans, they're forgiven, the IRS came out within weeks later, back in April, and they said, well, that money you're gonna get forgiven, you can't deduct it towards your federal income tax purposes. It's not an expense. It's not your money, so why are you gonna claim it as an expense? This act says you can now deduct that as an expense, which is something we've been waiting for. This is also something I've known has been in the pipeline. I've been telling as many people as I can, there's no rush to file for forgiveness. And some people filed already back in October, November, and they went through the hassle of getting documentation and bank statements and reports from payroll systems. In essence, loans under $2 million, it's going to be a simplified process. If it's under 150, it's basically, I think is what they say in the car industry, sign and drive. You sign a piece of paper and like literally that is it if your loan's under 150,000. 150 to 2 million, there's a little bit more certifications you need to do, but it should be a simple process. Again, don't expect to go to your bank tomorrow or today to say, hey, I want the simple process. They're going to still drag you through the paperwork process. This may just take another few days. I believe this also falls under the 10-day rule that SBA has to come out with the new process, but it may take your bank some time thereafter to actually put that into their system. And this is the last piece I have in my slides. I don't know if this necessarily applies to any of us, but if your business falls into certain categories, I think this was originally out there as a Save Our Stages Act, but it all got wound up into this act. There are certain industries that, if they were shuttered, had a 25% reduction in revenue. They're just giving free money, so there's no forgiveness that has to be done. You basically apply. It's based on your payroll, and they will give you funds that you can then use towards, well, just about every expense there is a business would have. So this is great for our performing arts venues. So like the malls and the Kravis and movie theaters. So I don't know, I think I wrapped it up in maybe 10 minutes. So if there's any questions, I know I went through this. I'm always available to elaborate on any of this for your specific situation.
Romeo, it's Brian.
Yes.
So you had mentioned that the SBA had 10 days. If I remember from the last PPP loan, just from talking to other business owners and from being on our calls, each bank is going to have to take some time in order to get their web forms up and ready for that application. Am I right? So not everyone's going to be ready to go the same day. Yeah.
So the SBA is set to have everything ready, the application ready, which they already have the application from the last one. They're modified a little bit. 10 days is their deadline. They present it to the banks. I would suspect banks are now ready for the process. They've already built their system, so it probably won't be as long as the first time around. But
okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, it'll be soon, I would suspect.
Any other questions? Romeo, we appreciate that. I know this is a constantly changing environment, and I know there's a lot going on here, so if you want to expand on it, we'd appreciate it. I'm sure we'll ask you for some more updates as this continues to develop. And
yeah,
I know I'll have questions, and I'm sure a lot of people on the phone will have questions. So we appreciate you and all the updates that you do. Let's just go hit on our calendar real quick, and then I will introduce our guest speakers. After breakfast today, we will have a membership committee, so please try to make that. Next week, we got Carm Colella. We got Edmore's Automotive Group. On the 19th, we have Express Employment Professionals with Leo Daly with Paul Twitty on the 26th, and Groundhog Day Checkmark Collections, Melissa Nash. All right, we'll jump into it because I've got quite the intro to read, and it's very interesting actually. This morning, we're ringing in the year with a team of guest speakers recommended by Rick Seymour. We appreciate you as well. It's always nice to mix it up a little bit and have a little motivation. So Ralph Campbell and Stuart Rosenfeld are planning to help us as leaders better engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies in the workplace. With more than 3 decades of experience as a labor and employment attorney, Stuart uses his legal training to provide high-level human resources consulting services to emerging and established businesses. A certified DISC and John Maxwell trainer coach, Stuart received the 2008 Leader of the Year from Leadership Broward. He is a graduate of Leadership Florida and a life work leadership and recognized numerous times through his legal career by best lawyers and super lawyers. It's pretty cool. As a husband, father, and grandfather, Rosenfeld enjoys time with his family and giving back to several nonprofit organizations. And we appreciate that he is sharing with us today. Ralph has spent 24 years in, I'm going to say that wrong, ontological leadership, performance-based consulting, diversity awareness, and youth mentoring to thousands of people in the United States. He believes that all individuals have the capacity to be leaders and the exercise effective leadership as their natural self-expression in all areas of their lives that matter most to them. After a successful 23-year in the business arena, where he was the CEO of one of the largest insurance agencies in South Florida, as well as co-founding 2 separate leadership training and development companies, Summit Education and Universal Dynamics, Campbell branched out on his own to create his dream job. All of his workshops are geared to have participants understand and experience that producing extraordinary results has no limits. Having spent more than 2 decades sitting on and chairing various community boards, starting companies, and volunteering his time to worthy charitable causes, he has hands-on experience working with people from all walks of life. His genuine caring approach and ability to connect with his audience in a sincere and authentic manner set him apart in that field. Please join me in welcoming Stuart and Ralph. I don't know who was going to go first, but go ahead.
Ralph, start.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Amy, and thank you, Rick. I don't think Rick's here today, but Stuart and I met Rick, I guess, a few months ago with the Jim Moran Institute for Global Entrepreneurship. We were leading a training, and so a show of hands, any of you have visited Key West, Florida? Great. Or you're looking at a conch. I grew up in Key West, Florida. So I spent all of my childhood in Key West, right on 923 Southern Street. And so if you haven't been, please visit. I'm a graduate of Leadership Florida and also Leadership Broward. And 17 years ago, I went through Leadership Broward and we got to select a community service project. And I selected the Non-Conference for Community and Justice. At the time, it was a 75-year-old organization headquartered out of New York, and their main goal was to fight bias, bigotry, and racism through conflict resolution, advocacy, and education. And that's where I met Stuart. I didn't like this gentleman at the time. He was just too funny, and he joked all the time. But we had one thing in common. One, we were human. 2 things. And 2, we cared immensely about eradicating some of the social ills that still exist today. So we spent 9 months becoming diversity trainers, and he's been my best friend ever since. And our job was to go to organizations throughout South Florida and present some of the work of this nonprofit that unfortunately went out of business. We then kept a local branch in South Florida, and we work with youth, we work with government, we work with any company that wanted to bring us in to educate their employees about diversity. And so that's me. I'm happy to be here to share some insights that we have and hopefully can make a difference with all of you. Stuart?
Pleased to meet you. I didn't write that bio. That I think it was a little exaggerated, but my life experience, I've been doing a lot of diversity training, is what I'm seeing right now. My wife is going through it at a national company. What I'm seeing right now is going to backfire. They're focusing too much on the negative, putting people on the defensive. So the approach that Ralph and I have developed, I like, because it teaches people that if they have discriminatory thoughts, they're most likely a brain flaw. and it teaches us how to recognize our unconscious biases without judging ourselves or putting ourselves down.
Thank you. And what we're going to do now, we are short on a little time today. So we want this to be, typically we do this face-to-face, but of course we are not doing face-to-face at the time being. And so we're going to go through this and try to keep this as quick as possible given the limited time. But if you have questions, please put them in the chat room. Allison knows how to get a hold of us. This is just the beginning for us. Again, we do this workshop in a half a day or a full day. And so we want to just share with you some of our ideas behind what we think will support diversity and inclusion moving forward. And so we'd be more than happy at a later date to come talk to your organization or talk to you personally. Again, we do this because this is our personal vision. So our learning objectives is really threefold. Obviously, we want to help foster a deep understanding and appreciation of the differences in backgrounds, cultures, and levels of self and social awareness. At one time being a leader, the data told us was really about ability. And what we know now about being a leader, yeah, of course you want to have ability, but it's also about this heightened sense of self-awareness, right? A heightened sense of self-awareness. And I'll touch on that a little later. Then two is establish a shared common language. One of the challenges when we talk about diversity and inclusion is that we're speaking different languages. I speak Spanish, you speak English. Someone speaks Russian, someone else speaks Mandarin, right? And so if I don't understand you and we're speaking different languages, we're not even going to be on the same page to have the conversation. And so our goal, Stu and I goal, one of our goals is to create some type of common language. We haven't perfected it. I believe no one has perfected it, but it's a noble goal to have this shared language. And then third, which is I'm excited about, and Stuart alluded to, is learn 4 proven frameworks that you as a leader, you can engage in to better support your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And a lot of these frameworks that when we've presented are relatively new, and they take a different angle on diversity, equity, inclusion. And so I hope you enjoy these frameworks, and we look forward to your feedback and dialogue in the future.
The first thing to realize is that everything you say and think is filtered through your own cultural perspective. So when I'm looking at any issue, I'm a 65-year-old American, white, straight, Jewish turned Christian, currently not disabled yet, male, with a law school degree, et cetera. You can get through the list of things. So the point is that we all have a unique point of view because it all comes from within our own brain and no place else. Ralph. So basically you have a lens that you look at the world at, that's your own personal lens. Which lens are you wearing?
This is called the Johari window. It came out in the early 50s by 2 psychologists. And they do this with groups and individuals. And it's a way to increase an individual's or a group's self-awareness. And there's 4 quadrants. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but this is one of the most important frameworks that I work with people. I'm an executive coach. And so I coach leaders and managers on becoming more self-aware and understanding their blind spots. And so the first quadrant is the open self. And it's this idea that I know something and you know something. And so we'll play a game today since we don't have a lot of time. So I know and you know that I'm from Key West, Florida, right? So I know and you know. Stuart, what's something that
I know and you know that I have a white beard.
Great.
No head hair.
Right. And then there's the second quadrant, and there's the I don't know and you know. And when we talk about unconscious bias, which we'll talk about today, or implicit bias, or as Sigmund Freud used to call it, unconscious cognition, it's these blind spots that we do not know we have. And all human beings have millions and millions and millions of blind spots. And we're going to have millions and millions of blind spots because we're born into these blind spots. But once I don't know something, and then you know something, that blind spot gets exposed. And a lot of blind spots are very, very helpful for human beings, and we do not know. We call those superpowers or strengths. And then a lot of blind spots obviously cause pain, harm to other individuals. And so I don't know And, going back in the past, I didn't know that, I could sometimes come across as condescending. I didn't know that. I thought I was a nice person. I grew up in Key West, Florida, Jimmy Buffett, flip-flops, right? But it was brought to my attention when I got in the business world that sometimes, man, I could come down condescending. So that became a blind spot for me, so I can be more aware, because that's not how I wanted to show up. Stuart, what's a past blind spot that you had that you were?
One you alluded to, Ralph. I do have a tendency, having, I guess, Jewish roots, to use humor as a means of dealing with stress. So I often make jokes. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're not, but I make jokes when I'm trying to avoid being serious, when I'm trying to not confront a situation. So I've learned that that's a defense mechanism, and to try and control it.
Great. And as we continue to go through these, please keep in mind diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll go through definitions shortly. But when we have these blind spots and you're looking into the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can begin to see how they can get organizations and ourselves in trouble. There's the intention we have, and then there's the result that we create. And oftentimes, sometimes, there's a disconnect. We call that disassociation or cognitive dissonance, right? Where I have an intention, but the result shows up differently. And then there's the hidden self. This is a good one. This is something that I know about myself, but you don't know. We call these secrets in college, right? We would play these games. You had secrets or something that I know about myself and you don't know. So something that I know that you don't know is I have twin boys, right? So a hidden self is, not a bad thing, not a good thing. It's just something that, Stuart, what's your hidden self? Or one?
I'm not going to tell it because I want to keep it hidden.
Exactly. There you go. And then we had the fourth quadrant. There's the I don't know and you don't know. And this is a very powerful quadrant. This is where learning occurs. This is where people we call breakthroughs. We have these aha moments where I didn't know something and you didn't know something. Now together we know something. Especially when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have these aha moments or we call learning moments. We kind of hear that phrase often used. And so the question I have on the floor today, if you were to look at, you only have one choice. Which bucket or which quadrant do you think is most important when we talk about being a leader? And in the context today, we're all leaders. So in the context of this discussion, everyone in this room is a leader. You only have one choice, and there is an answer. Open self, I heard the open self. Anybody else? What's the most important you think in regards to leadership out of the four quadrants?
Blind self.
Okay.
Bottom right.
Unknown self? Okay, great. Well, the data tells us, and the correct answer is the open self. Why so? Well, it's this idea that once I reduce and become exposed, get aware and exposed to my blind spots, they're no longer blind spots. They go now to my self-awareness, my open self, self-transparency. Same thing with the hidden self. Same thing with the unknown self. Once I discover these blind spots or things I didn't know about myself, and now I know about myself, now I can make the changes. Now I can change my belief system. Now I can change my behaviors. And so it's this idea that as we go through life and we keep getting exposed to our blind spots, we become more aware, and then they no longer become blind spots.
It's important that we have a common shared language so that when we talk about something, we all understand it. So we want to establish an understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion principles.
And the work that we're presenting today comes from a few different sources. One is the Annie E. Case Foundation. You can Google the Annie E. Case Foundation. They do great work with the foster care system. They do great work with diversity, equity, inclusion. So we want to share with you where we're getting our information, and so that you can use it as a source as well. And so diversity is a mosaic of people who bring a variety of backgrounds, styles, perspectives, values, and beliefs as assets to the groups and organizations with which they interact. It's funny because I've used many definitions. I won't say millions, but a lot of definitions about diversity. This is one of the best ones that I can get 20 people in a room, Stuart, and actually agree that this is a good working definition.
And you notice that diversity doesn't talk about race, religion. I mean, one of the beauties of diversity is diversity of thought. It adds to the final product. It's
Correct.
probably a key to innovation, at least in my clients' workplaces. So it's not so much diversity for diversity's sake, it's diversity because the variety of experiences and thoughts of people contribute to a bigger whole.
Correct.
Inclusion is the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. More than simply diversity and numerical representation, inclusion involves authentic and empowered participation and a true sense of belonging.
Yeah, we hear diversity. It's about having a seat at the table, and inclusion is having a voice at the table.
Yes, well said. And it's important that diversity is inherent in inclusion, but inclusion is inherent in diversity.
It's very, very powerful. We often hear, oh, diversity, diversity. It's definitely inherent in inclusion, but as Stuart said, it's not always, you can have a lot of diversity, but very little inclusion. And this is the one that sometimes people get confused with equity and equality. So again, we're just trying to give all of us operational definitions. So equity is defined as the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. It's synonymous with fairness and justice, and it's helpful to think of equity as not simply a desired state of affairs or a lofty value to be achieved and sustained. Equity needs to be thought of as a structural and systemic concept. It's a system.
Equality aims to ensure that everyone gets the same thing in order to enjoy their full, healthy lives. It aims to promote fairness and justice, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same things.
Unconscious bias, unconscious bias, otherwise known as implicit bias, these are inherent or learned stereotypes about people that everyone forms without realizing it. You and I are walking bias machines, okay? This is a great thing for human beings. Unconscious biases are social stereotypes about an individual, group, or institution. Everyone has them, right? Everyone has them, and not all biases, as I said before, are negative. Oftentimes when we do workshops, we focus on the biases that don't support us, but it's also important to note that all of us have these unconscious biases. We learn them from our mom, dad, society, religion, et cetera, and they help us navigate our place in the world.
Racial justice is the systemic fair treatment of people of all races that results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for everyone. All people are able to achieve their full potential in life, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or the community in which they live. Racial justice or racial equity goes beyond, quote, anti-racism. It's not just about what we are against, but also what we are for. A racial justice framework can move us from a reactive posture to a more powerful, proactive, and even preventative approach.
There's been a lot of talk and conversation about structural racism. So structural racism describes a system. It's a dynamic system that produces and replicates racial ideologies, racial beliefs, identities, and inequities. Systematic racialization is the well-institutionalized pattern of discrimination. Some of these patterns of discrimination show up in healthcare, housing, the criminal justice system, to name a few, that cuts across major political and economic social organizations. Public attention to racism is generally focused on the symptoms, such as a racist slur we call racial prejudice, rather than the system of racial inequality.
Okay, stereotypes. Let's talk about them. It's a generalization about a person, a group of persons that's widely accepted by others.
So talk a little about stereotypes, Stuart, because again, a lot of individuals have this idea that stereotypes are inherently not good.
And the fact is they're inherently human. Let me give you an example. I'm an 11-year-old kid and I live in my house and I watch this lady walk down the street and litter. A white middle-class lady does it, then another white middle-class lady does it, then another white middle-class does it. I am going to stereotype that white middle-class women do not care about the cleanliness of our streets. They just throw things on the ground. And that's just the brain working because it's saw it 4 times. It concludes the 5th time it's going to happen the same way.
Yeah, and a lot of the work that Stuart and I have focused on the last, I'd say 5 to 6 years has to do with brain science. Really, how can we understand these social constructs that we're talking about today from the perspective of what's happening in our brains. And the brain learns through pattern recognition. That's why social media is so popular. All it has to do is see something over and over again. It begins to formulate a belief, largely at times unconscious, and then we act it out. And so, yes, there's positive stereotypes out there. I grew up in Key West. There's a lot of stereotypes I won't say about Key West, right? I will say, I'm a part of those stereotypes, and I would argue that they were good stereotypes. But we also know stereotypes are generalizations oftentimes, and they are not true. They're often not true.
By definition, prejudice is either a bias in favor of or against something. I've actually, in the workplace discrimination cases, seen more bias in favor of groups than against groups. Let's go, Raph, we're getting on time. I figured let's move into this stuff. Number one, I think, the number one rule for diversity and inclusion is talking, dialogue. In order to understand each other's point of view, seek first to understand. It's dialogue in order to communicate your own position, and it's dialogue in order to arrive at a mutually beneficial agreement that serves common goals.
Keyword, dialogue. Culture refers to the cumulative deposit of knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, attitudes, and religion by a group of people.
I love that definition, Ralph.
Me too. That's one of the best ones I've seen as well.
And cultural awareness, you have to know your own background, recognize your own stereotypes and biases, gain knowledge of cultural history and heritage, be aware of others' perceptions, and recognize the effects of ism on the others.
Yeah,
racism, sexism, nationalism, whatever.
Yeah, we would go into the school districts and teach the young children about the isms and how important it was to understand the isms. Yes, and that's why the Johari window is so important. You can actually begin to formulate, what are your biases? What are my stereotypes? Do they serve me? Do they serve other people, right? You can ask yourself that question, do your own self-reflection.
Tolerance is defined as the recognition and respect for the opinions, practices, or behaviors of others. One of the things Ralph and I do in our workshops is we put meat to that. By people talking and learning how to listen empathetically, they're able to exchange views in a way that doesn't cause controversy or anger.
Yeah, and this word is also starting to be challenged because sometimes the interpretation can be, oh, I'm just tolerating you. That doesn't necessarily mean I respect you or I'm treating you with dignity. So there's a lot of debate about that. But as human beings, we keep using different words and they have different meanings throughout the years.
And the ultimate goal isn't toleration, it's celebration.
Mm-hmm. So an assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen without proof. Human beings, we are walking bias machines. We are walking assumption machines, right? Most individuals struggle with an assumption versus an assertion. We make assumptions and we act like though there are assertions, but they're just assumptions, right? And oftentimes there's very little proof. We see that a lot with social media where there's a lot of assumptions made and then you go, well, where'd you get that information from? And then we have this disinformation and misinformation. And so all human beings, we make assumptions and oftentimes we believe it to be true, but we don't have a lot of proof. So,
and then our confirmation bias wants us to really learn.
Yes. And then we find a piece of evidence, confirmation bias. So this is the picture of a person. Please let me know what she's thinking. What do you think her expression is? Go ahead and make an assumption because we do it all the time. Who is she? And what is this expression? What's a facial expression?
Be 100 things.
Go ahead, just guess.
Giving birth, celebrating, pain, all of it.
Singing real hard.
I thought giving birth.
I think she could be really excited.
Right.
Okay.
A concert or something.
Yeah. But see, this is what happens. We see a situation, we see a person, and our brains, and we're going to go into this in a minute, our brains are designed to guess what is going to happen next. And there's nothing wrong with that. That comes out of this predictive brain, and a face doesn't speak for itself. And guess what? Guess who this is? Oops, sorry. Serena Williams. She's happy. She just beat her sister. Right? She beat Venus, actually. This is Serena here, but she's excited. And again, a face can tell 1,000 words. Now, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what can support us promoting diversity, equity, inclusion? Mindsets. And so some of you may have heard of the work of Carol Dweck, or even the phrase or the term mindset's very popular. Mindsets simply are mental lenses that we use to view the world. They dictate the information our minds absorb. And then that information is how we think, learn, and behave. And you saw a picture earlier with a bunch of different lenses. All of us wear different eyeglasses every day. And those eyeglasses are metaphors for how we see the world. And every result that we produce comes out of mindsets. And so we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. There's 3 mindsets that we use, and they're on a continuum. So it's not like you're fixed or your growth. Think of this as a continuum, and that all of us, when we talk about fixed and growth, are on a continuum. And through self-discovery, self-awareness, we get a clear picture of exactly what mindset we're operating in. And so the first set is the most popular one. It's been taught for the past 25 years, the growth mindset. Growth mindset simply is this belief that we're able to change our talents, abilities, skills, or intelligence, like a tree, right? Fixed mindset is this belief that I'm unable, and I believe you're unable, to change your talents, abilities, intelligence, or talent is innate, fixed. I'm either good at math or I'm not good at math. I'm either a pleasant person to be around or I'm not, right? This whole idea that we're binary, and we're not binary, because we are humans and we're flexible and we're able to change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. So when people say, oh, I didn't say that behavior, I didn't say that comment. Well, someone said that's a bigoted comment, or that was a racist comment, or that was a very sexist comment. You have, well, that's just me. No, that's not you. That's your mindset speaking. That's not you. That's your mindset speaking. Then the second popular one, when I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion training, is this idea that open and close. Open is that I'm open to the ideas of others, and I'm going to give those ideas time and thought. Close, I'm not open to the ideas of others. People say, Ralph, I'm really, really open. But the data says that most human beings, including Ralph Campbell and Stuart Roosevelt, we overvalue how open we are. We think we're more open, but the data says we're selectively open. What does that mean? That means that I like Carmine, or I like Allison, and therefore I'm listening from I like Allison, but I subconscious, and so I'm more open when we disagree. I'm more open to her ideas or Stuart's ideas, versus I don't have anything in common with Ralph Campbell, and therefore, again, this is happening unconsciously, I'm not as open, or I'm not open at all. And so we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, obviously working on having an open mindset. That's where you're going to have that dialogue. That's where you're going to discover your blind spots. And then the last one is the inward outward mindset. Inward mindset, marginalization, treat others as objects, a means to an end. And then the outward mindset, we treat others as people and we view them as such. And so those are on a continuum. And if we had time, we would give you an assessment that we use, and then you can actually see where you are in that continuum, because the goal is to become more aware so that you can get better.
Okay, listening the key to it all. I love that quote. If my mouth is moving, I'm not learning. We have our already always listening unconscious bias getting in the way all the time. As we are talking, involved in pretty much anything, we're making judgments, we're making evaluations, and we're forming opinions, whether we realize it or not.
And here's the good news. It's already there, and it's always there in how you listen. So anytime we see someone, all of us has an already always listening that's largely unconscious. You walk into why do you walk into a room sometimes, and sometimes you put your hand out, or sometimes you hug someone? Or you walk into a grocery store, sometimes you smile at someone, and sometimes you do not smile. And it's all happening unconsciously. It's because you've learned that person, whatever your history was, whatever you learned about that person, whatever the situation, and I'll make this simple, a person has a gun in his hand, you're probably not going to hug that person. You have an already always listening, because that means danger. So just think about some of the already always listenings that we have of other people that are different from us, racially different. They think different. They have a different religion. They have a different dialogue. They have a different college in Florida. You start talking about universities, right? So we have this already always listening, and it could be anything. And these are a number of one. We couldn't fill the whole page. All of these, all of us have an already always listening. The goal is to ask ourselves and become aware, what's my already always listening? Is it helpful? Does it serve? Is it treating people with equality, with dignity? Or do I have an already always listening that's a bias, that's not fair, that's demeaning, that harms people? And then the question on the floor is, what's your already always listening? If you have a listening, like I do at times when I'm driving with my mom, I have a listening called I already know. I'm driving down the road and I take a right and she says, take a right. And we call that what backseat drivers do it, right? So my listening is I already know. So I cut her off. So look at any one of these. You have an already always listening. And just like mindsets, once you have an already always listening, your actions come out of your listening. If I have an already always listening of I love spinach, so every time I say spinach, it's going to be a good outcome. If I have an already always listening, I don't like you because you're 8 feet tall or you're overweight, then my listening is going to be distorted because I have a bias. And so all biases, all they are really is another term, is already always listening. The goal is to determine what you're already always listening.
It's important to listen to learn, not to confirm. The average person talks at a rate of what, 125, 75 minutes per minute, but we listen at 450 words per minute. Because of the difference between the speaking speed and the thought speed, we have a 75% time differential within which to encourage our minds to wander. If we define the good listener as one who gives full attention to the speaker, the first grade children are the best of all. Prior to 3200 BC, when writing was first used by cultures, listening to people speak and repeating the message was the only way to communicate knowledge.
Big takeaway. We listen faster than we speak. So as I coach people, slow is fast, fast is slow. Our brains were designed to take in information much faster.
There are 5 levels of listening. I'm going to do, well, Ralph, I think you were going to do the first 2.
Mm-hmm. So I want you to think of the 5 levels of listening when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And how that sometimes gets in the way. And so the first level of listening is pretty easy. We do this pretty well. We just ignore. People are talking, you haven't heard a word they say.
And then there's pretending, where you try to listen, but you start thinking about something else, you get distracted. And when you're done the conversation, you don't realize what they said at all. That happens with me and my wife a lot.
It's a very popular one, right? And then there's selective. This is the most popular. This is more popular than pretending. You're fully engaged in a conversation, but you are just waiting to respond. Like, Allison, I don't care what you tell me. I'm looking at you, but I just want you to be quiet so I can just jump in and give my perspective. Well, you're really not listening. That's called already always listening. You already have a judgment, opinion, or evaluation already made up, and you're just waiting for Allison to be quiet, and then you just jump in. Turn on the news. There's about 50 news channels out there, or hundreds, and you see a lot of selective listening. And then you have go ahead, Stuart.
And you tend not to really hear what was said because you're worried on interpreting in your own version of it. You're so interested in what am I going to say next that you haven't heard what they were saying. You responded to 2 thoughts behind.
Yeah, I was trained at my elevator pitch. I used to go to these networking meetings when I was in my 20s, and I never listened. They just told me, Ralph, memorize and then speak. Then I got feedback that I wasn't listening, but I didn't know that because I was trained. That was the way you did, but I was doing selective listening. Attentive listening, Stuart.
Attentive listening is hard to get to, but it's basically putting your full attention on understanding what the people are saying, but you're still doing it. And this is where it's not empathetic. You're still doing it with your own implicit biases in your head, what it means in your world. Well, he's saying this, what does that mean to me? as opposed to the next level that you're going to talk about.
Yes, empathetic listening, the most powerful listening, and this is when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, why it's so important. You're listening without applying the filters of your own experiences, judgments, values, needs. Not that they're not important, but you're listening from understanding what it means to be in their world, what it means to be in their culture, what it means to be in their neighborhood, what it means to have their perspective. This isn't saying that you agree or disagree. This means that you are just listening to try, as Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Trying to understand where they're coming from their perspective.
It's not just I hear you, it's I feel you. And we work in our workshops on trying to create a dialogue that gets to that.
Yeah, many employees are engaged and the feedback is overwhelming. They don't feel heard. And what they're saying is they don't feel that they're valued because when they're sharing their experiences, they feel oftentimes that they're being dismissed.
Here's some tips for listening well. The key one is don't interrupt. Let them finish their thought and don't start preparing your response until they're done. Be comfortable with a pregnant pause. Don't listen just to prepare your answers. Listen, understand. It's good at technique, and this is one of the things we teach in our workforce, is to paraphrase back. It shows that you understood it right. It shows you care what they think. Did I get that right? Eye contact, we all know, is very important. And this is one of my blinds. I had this tendency to doodle when when I'm in the middle of a depth conversation, my pen and my hand are off on the side doodling. Even if I think I'm concentrating, which is probably hurting it, it's definitely giving a bad impression to the person listening to me. So I need to stop that. And then asking non-leading questions. We're looking for the truth. So we want to hear them, what they say, not hear them affirm our belief. And then, of course, put away the phone, which I'll note is not on the table with me right now.
Very good, Stuart. Mine is. Misunderstandings are a normal part of communication, either because we unintentionally or intentionally use the wrong words, or because we don't understand what is being said to us. Again, Johari Window. To prevent misunderstanding, know who you're talking to. Be respectful and be sure of what you want to say. The predictive brain.
Yeah, I heard you close.
There's a neuroscientist at a Harvard Medical name is Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she says that the human brain. Can mute that, please. She says that the human brain runs an internal model of the world using past experiences as predictions. These predictions guide our actions and determine our experiences and perceptions. The wiring of the brain guarantees it. To some extent, we all channel unconscious bias toward others. So let me unpack what she just said. She said that you and I are essentially guessing when we go into a situation or we see a person, we are guessing about what we should do next. And the brain is a predictive machine. It's not a reactive machine. So we were taught cause effect. I yell at you, you yell back, right? I touch you, you touch me, and that's cause effect. And yes, from a psychological perspective, that is true. But from a neuroscience perspective, you and I are not really reacting. Our brain is giving us predictions. Just as I said before, you walk into a happy hour and you hug that person, your brain gave you a prediction that you've hugged that person in the past, or you have a great relationship, you have a close relationship with that person in the past. And so the brain's predictive, not reactive. And now we're going to do a little test, and I'm going to prove to you that the brain is predictive and it doesn't react. So this is a TED Talk that she gave, and this TED Talk was one of the top TED Talks in 2018. What do you think that is? And I'm not David Copperfield. This is actually something. So with respect to time, I'm not going to keep it going.
Canberra.
What'd you say?
It's the Florida Keys.
Close, but wrong. Okay, with respect to time, let me tell you what your brain's doing. Your brain is firing neurons. We have 86 billion neurons in our brain. It's firing neurons trying to figure out what this is. Remember I said before, the brain has one main job and it learns through pattern recognition. It's asking, what is this? Where have I seen this before? The brain is just computing where have I seen this image before, and if it can figure out where it's seen it before, then it gives you a prediction of what you should be doing next in a situation. Remember walking across the street, look left, look right, left again. Those are all predictions. And if your brain can't figure it out, we have a word, it's called you are experientially blind. So all of you today are experientially blind. So drum roll, please. There you go. You see the snake? There's the snake. Now, if I kept doing this for another 30 seconds to a minute, next time when you're walking outside and you look into the clouds and you see an image, guess what prediction your brain's going to give you? And this is what happens when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. When we're making these assumptions about people, we make predictions of people based on very little evidence, or if we're watching TV or whatever our brain gets fed, oftentimes we draw a conclusion. And this is what's happening to all of us. Anytime you are with people in any situation, your brain is predicting. It's called the prediction loop. And what happens is you walk into a room and your brain says, okay, I've been here before, and your brain starts firing up and it says, this is what you did before in the past, Ralph. Sometimes you've heard of flight, fight, or freeze. It's giving you a situation. You were giving a speech. It's already telling you what you should do. And then you have our five senses. And then you and I make predictions. And it happens unconsciously. You're not aware this is happening. This happens to all of us. And then we have a prediction error. So when you are made aware that you said something that is hurting somebody, is harmful, is said in an inappropriate way, you can only change that in the future. And so we talk about, well, how do I get better at diversity, equity, inclusion? It's about making new predictions, meeting people that are different than you, going places, meeting people that have different perspectives. Stuart talked about different perspectives. We call that cognitive diversity. So our brains do nothing but give predictions. This woman has a wonderful book. It's a New York Times bestseller, and it's called How Emotions Are Made. And she talks about this model that all of us are making predictions. The great news is that once you understand you're making predictions, guess what? You can create new predictions. And in summary, she just says that our brains issue a storm of predictions, simulates our consequences as if they were present, and then it tells us what we should or shouldn't be doing. And as we wrap up, we're going to wrap up with what we call dignity. And this is written by a woman out of Harvard. Her name is Dr. Donna Hicks. And she writes about dignity and how understanding dignity and understanding when we violate someone's dignity, how both are very helpful in how we go about our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. She says we all want to be treated as if we matter. We all want to be treated as if we are something of value and worth. And her definition of dignity is our inherent value and worth. When people are treated with dignity, diversity is a great thing. Equity is a great thing. Inclusion is not only being at the table, but you have a voice. When people have a dignity violation, that's when we have problems with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we're going to do now, briefly, as we wrap up, we're going to go through her 10 ingredients that make up dignity. So these are the 10 we're going to go through. And when any one of these are violated, we call these dignity violations. Anytime someone feels one of these are violated, you are going to have a conflict.
Acceptance of identity. Approach people as being neither inferior nor superior to you. Give others the freedom to express their authentic selves without fear of being judged. Interact without prejudice or bias. Accepting the characteristics such as race, religion, etc., are all at the core of our identities.
When people don't feel accepted for their identity, that's a dignity violation. You're going to have conflict. Recognition, validate others for their talents, hard work, and thoughtfulness and help. Be generous with praise. People are not recognized enough. When people do not feel recognized, you're going to have a dignity violation and you're going to have problems in the workplace.
Acknowledgement.
Ralph,
Yes.
we'd love to hear it keep going. It's 8:30. We usually wrap up about now.
Okay.
So Yeah, I mean, this is a great presentation, but let's open the floor for some quick questions. Or if you want to go back to that previous screen and kind of read down it real quick, the 10 elements, and then yeah.
We could just leave them up here. These are pretty self-explanatory, right? So treating people, being fair, giving people the benefit of the doubt, understanding people, allowing people to have their autonomy, and then being accountable when you make a mistake, when you say something wrong. And so these are the 10 steps, and we're done. That was it for us, Brandon.
Any questions for Ralph or Stuart?
I have one. I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Stuart, you're going to have to think a little. I believe when I first started with my company, you guys might have come in and did a sensitivity training class. I'm not sure if it was you, and I believe we used the series The Office as all the do's and don'ts with Michael Scott. And I have to tell you, it was probably one of the best seminars I've ever been involved in, to just see what you say and what people see and hear. Really, it was eye-opening. So I know that was a long time ago, but I think that still holds up for anyone on this call, that if you watch that show, you'll probably learn a lot of this.
But we use The Office as a what not to do in a social.
Yes. Yes.
It was funny, but unfortunately, the topics just in the last couple of years, I've gotten to the point where I don't like telling as many jokes about this topic.
No, I know, but it really opened your eyes to what goes on, and how, again, your situation is different than everyone else's, and you got to be more aware of that type of stuff. So I thought that was really good, as was today.
Amazing presentation, guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
I think Socrates said, "Know thyself." I think that was his motto. So it seems to be a big part of what you're talking about. And unfortunately today, with Carmine's point with the social media influence, and we all have cognitive dissonance, and there's confirmation bias everywhere. And it's such an important thing to be aware of your surroundings.
The last thing, I believe there was a play called I forgot what it was. It was like a take on Sesame Street, and I think the whole thing, there was a song and it says everyone's a little bit racist, and it really goes to show just that we all have it. You don't know.
Quick question, Ralph. Are the slides available?
Yes, I'll email the slides to Allison, and we have a page that gives books and information where we got our information from.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you
guys.
so much for having us.
We appreciate you. And anybody that wants to get a hold of them, please reach out to Allison. But yeah, that was a great presentation, and all of that is so important. Don't forget, we have a membership committee after this. And our closing quote: when someone asks what I did over the weekend, I squint and I ask, why? What did you hear? All right, everybody, have a great day.
Good job. Good seeing you, Stuart. Take care.
Same here, Carmine. Give my best to Teddy.
Yes.